Go ahead, Commissioner.
All right, I think we're live now. So good afternoon. I'm going to call the General Government Committee to order. Today is June 2nd, 2020. And I will ask that the clerk please call the roll.
Commissioner Gerlach.
Here.
Commissioner Egan.
Here.
Commissioner Slavic.
Here.
Commissioner Gaylord.
Here.
Commissioner Workman.
Here.
Commissioner Atkins.
Here.
Commissioner Holberg.
Here. All right, thank you. Normally we would go out to the audience, but given this format, if there are any public comments, you're asked to please submit them to countyadmin@co.dakota.mn.us. I am not aware of any public comments for this meeting, so we will move to the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved, Workman.
Second, Egan.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Clerk will please call the roll.
Commissioner Egan.
Yes.
Commissioner Slavic.
Yes.
Commissioner Gaylord.
Yes.
Commissioner Workman.
Yes.
Commissioner Atkins.
Yes.
Commissioner Holberg.
Yes.
Commissioner Gerlach.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. All right, that takes us to the consent agenda. We have the approval of the minutes from May 19th and items 5.1 and 5.2. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. This is Atkins.
Okay,
Second, Gerlach.
motion by Atkins, second by Gerlach. Clerk will please call the roll.
Commissioner Slavic.
Yes.
Commissioner Gaylord.
Yes.
Commissioner Workman.
Yes.
Commissioner Atkins.
Yes.
Commissioner Holberg.
Yes.
Commissioner Gerlach.
Yes.
Commissioner Egan.
Commissioner Egan, you want to
Yes.
unmute? There
Yes.
you go. Okay. Thank you. All right. That takes us to the regular agenda. We have a couple updates today. The first update is our legislative update. And I know we've got, I don't know, Matt Smith, Paul Cassidy, Jeremy, several people that want to weigh in. I think even Mary Beth is going to give us some information. So I'm going to start with Matt, if Matt's on.
Yeah, Commissioner, thank you. I wanted to start my video, and apparently the host has stopped my video. So, but hopefully you can hear me. Oh, now he's restarted me. Yeah, I don't know. As we were getting prepared for the meeting, I'm not sure whether Stenson was going to be available at this time. I know we were working on getting them here. The only thing that I would offer, as we've talked about before, is while we still wait for the legislature, the governor, or someone to make a decision about CARES Act funding. As you heard about this morning, you know, there are opportunities to put those dollars to use out in the community, and certainly as well to reimburse our own budget for costs that we've incurred and will incur through the rest of the year. So I want to let the board know that we are in the process of developing a menu of options that would be compliant with what we understand the CARES requirements to be, and that would be in terms of the outward facing potential uses of CARES money faced toward businesses facing distress, households facing various kinds of housing or other kinds of distress, and community institutions such as long-term care centers and others. And so we'll have that information ready for a board discussion once we know how much money we have to deal with. And I'll just say that based on the last enactments we have in either body, and then what Micah at least has been advocating for in terms of a 60% share to counties on a per capita basis. This House bill would have had it at about $34 million, the Senate at 38.5, and the Micah advocacy would pencil out to just under $45 million. So that's somewhere in there, probably is the ballpark of what we would likely end up with, we think. So with that, Madam Chair, I think I would probably pass it to Jeremy, I think is on from Stinson.
right,
Madam
Jeremy.
Chair.
Welcome.
Well, thank you, and hope everybody is well. The first thing I'll do is build on what Matt said
Nice
this
pick.
morning. What's that?
Nice pick.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not by my computer now, so I thought that would be that would be better than my current condition. But Commissioner Franz was in front of the Senate Finance Committee this morning, and the news was good in that there was about 20% more money being allocated to the state of Minnesota from the feds. He went on to say that that money would not go to either Hennepin or Ramsey County. He also didn't say that it wouldn't go to the cities of Minneapolis or St. Paul. So if I was confusing there, he said it would not go to either Hennepin or Ramsey County, but he didn't say that it wouldn't go to Minneapolis or St. Paul. Overall, that took the number from 660 and change to 840 something. And so to the numbers Matt was using, if everything stays the same and the formula doesn't change, which the commissioner was clear to say that they were still working on and they didn't have all the guidance that they needed yet from the feds, you know, that could be between $5 and $7 million more dollars to Dakota County. The other big item is special session, and as it relates to the governor's special powers, would there be other agenda items that might be worked out? And I would say prior to this, to late last week and this weekend, there wasn't enough consensus to get us to a bonding bill. And this is just the world according to me, but on June 12th and after this weekend's events, I really think there's not enough consensus to get us to a bonding bill on June 12th or 13th. The People of Colors Caucus had a press conference today, which unfortunately the audio was so poor, I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I believe the gist of it was that in order for anything to pass as part of a special session, they have some ideas about what they'd like the police reform bill to be. And in order to get there, they would withhold their votes for a bonding bill. So I think the maze has gotten a lot more complicated for a bonding bill to get completed on June 12th. And that's really the extent of the meat, Madam Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the board? All right, I don't see anyone. Okay, so Matt, I have here that Mary Beth also wants to speak. I'm not sure if that's something.
Yeah, so commissioners.
There she is.
Yeah, here she is. And, you know, in the legislative advisory work group, and I think as the board is aware, you know, we had tentatively set dates for a groundbreaking of sorts, at least at the for the Smart Center. And Mary Beth wanted to just walk the board through the current plan that we're envisioning for holding that event in these unusual circumstances. So I think Mary Beth, I invite you to say a little more about that.
All right, thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Nathan will be pulling up an ever so brief PowerPoint. If we could just move to the next slide, Nathan. I just want to run through the concept and start with just putting context around why why the law group thought that they would do a groundbreaking. So certainly to recognize and thank co-authors and our legislative delegation for their support. That would be one reason why we do it. We'd also bring our partners together and in a COVID kind of way. So I'll explain that in a minute. And we would thank them as well. And then we would remind the public about the importance of an alternative training facility for law enforcement. So again, this was a week ago before things have changed. And then to the next slide, Nathan, please. The concept of the actual event is it would be an open house style. So this would alleviate us from trying to gather together as groups or even gather together and separate. We thought that it could just be free and kind of easy between a certain allotment of time, potentially between 10 and 12:30. We'd capture video of people breaking ground. So they would arrive, we'd hand them a shovel, and they would break ground, shovel some dirt. And quite frankly, after that, really kind of be on their way. And then we would compile some of those quick takes into one master video. We'd also try to capture remarks from Commissioner Slavic, the sheriff, and then Mayor George Torville in the video to provide some additional context. And it would be an opportunity to be, kind of try to connect with our legislative delegation one last time before the 12th about our priorities and focus. So that's kind of what we were aiming for with the groundbreaking. I don't know if there's any other comments or thoughts on shaping the event.
Comments or thoughts? So again, when would we try to hold this, Mary Beth?
Well, originally it was going to be for Monday, the 8th. And we did already inform our legislators on one of the recent calls to put a hold on that date. We can move on an invitation more formally, so to speak, this afternoon to a broader audience and to other key stakeholders. But we did have the 8th.
Okay. I'm not seeing anyone. So that okay with everyone? Modified version of a open house event. Okay.
All right, we'll proceed in that fashion. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Matt, back to you.
Thank you. So commissioners, I don't have anything on my end in terms of legislative update, although I'd certainly invite any other commissioners or the legislative advisory work group chair to add anything.
Commissioner Atkins, anything?
Good afternoon. Nope,
Good
I
afternoon.
got nothing.
All right.
I think it was a good summary. I appreciate the work that Jeremy and Matt Mossman, Paul Cassidy, and so many others have been doing to make sure that we get our case before legislators, and specifically to our legislative delegation. They have done a phenomenal job of getting our story to the right folks. So hopefully we're well positioned. And finally, just a shout out to Board Chair Slavic, who's stepped up in a lot of ways. I know just about everybody here on the board has had some contact with somebody, but Mike, thank you for everything that you've been doing. That's it, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Sounds great. I've had an opportunity to talk to a couple legislators one-on-one and try to give them some idea, particularly on the CARES Act of our concerns. So encourage other members of the board, if you have an opportunity to talk to some of your legislative delegation, to let them know that we are trying to get this moving forward and get the money to counties sooner rather than later, because we are spending the money as we speak. So, Commissioner Egan, did you?
Well, just to share with you, Madam Chair, at the request of Matt Mossman, I did contact Representative Lori Halverson, who, by the way, is trying to take my place. And I did have a conversation with her and shared our desire for a fair share of the chorus money as well.
All right. We thought you would be a good person to touch base with her. So thank you for doing that. Commissioner Slavic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is just a question for Mary Beth. As I understand it, really, this is with the event itself, it's not really necessarily a public event. We're kind of almost an invitation only. You're going to do your video for that open house there, but it's not something we're posting to Facebook and in the before state. I understand you'll make a video and that would be put on social media, but at least the process to get there, it's kind of those who are watching our meeting or those who get invited are kind of the only people who will know about it. Pretty accurate.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Commissioners, thank you for asking that, Commissioner Slavic. That is correct. We won't be putting a press release out or putting it on social media ahead of time. After the event, we might do something, but it's not necessarily something that we'll be proactively doing.
Thank you, Mary Beth, Madam Chair. The reason why I say that mostly is because we are still in a COVID time and we're trying to be leaders in large gatherings and that, and I hate to have us go in and do something that creates a large gathering when restrictions are not still there. So
Exactly.
And if I may, that's the object behind the open house concept. So over a stretch of a few hours, people are invited. So thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, with that, let's move on to 6.2, which is information on the update on the Dakota County Communications Center report. And we have a couple of people that are going to be speaking on this, but Matt, do you want to start us out?
Sure, Madam Chair and Commissioners, I mean, as you all know, there's been an ongoing conversation around the future governance and financing of the DCC. And as this has progressed, you know, our staff have done some earlier research. An outside entity did a research report about how it operates. I think one of the important questions that you as a board asked last time we talked about this was, aside from the money split question, would a county operated DCC actually operate any better or differently in ways that matter to the public? And so at least that's one of the questions that staff were trying to get at by learning about other centers. So I think I'd ask them to report a summary of the research they did for you quickly. And then I think I'll probably turn to Commissioner Slavic. I know he has a comment or two he wants to make thoughts about this going forward.
All right, thank you. Alex, did you want to start us out? I see you popped in. All right.
And then do we have the slideshow, the PowerPoint? There we go. Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I'm Alex Dermeland, a management analyst with the Office of Performance and Analysis, or OPA. My project partner, Dave Paulson, and I will be walking through our DCC Research Phase 2 report. Next slide, please. In 2018, 2 reports were completed. The OPA's Dakota Communication Center Governance Model Research and Winborne's Operational and Technical Assessment Report for the DCC. In response, a work group was formed to re-examine potential governance changes. As work progressed, efforts were redirected towards Dakota County assuming ownership of the DCC, and a resolution was adopted by the DCC Board of Directors asking the Dakota County Board of Commissioners to consider assuming ownership and management duties of the DCC, and that this matter be publicly discussed by the Dakota County Board of Commissioners. In August 2019, this committee discussed the resolution and directed staff to research peer dispatch centers to assist stakeholders. Next slide, please. Slide 3 provides an overview of peer counties included in this report. Hennepin County is included on this slide, but they are not included in the study due to size of population and multiple 911 dispatch centers within the county. There are 8 total dispatch centers within Hennepin County, including their own. We will cover Anoka County's public safety levy on an upcoming slide, but we do have it noted on this slide. Next slide, please. As the previous slide showed, even with a high overview of each county, we can see unique attributes reflected in how dispatch centers serve their respective jurisdictions. There's JPAs in Dakota and Ramsey counties. Ramsey County's JPA is located within their county administration. Anoka County is housed within their county administration. And then Scott and Washington counties are housed in their respective sheriff's offices. Next slide, please. For finance structure, we see that most revenue is provided through some kind of property tax, with 911 state revenue funds providing some funding. Anoka, Scott, and Washington counties are funded through county property taxes. The DCC and Ramsey County are a combination of county and city property taxes, each member's share determined through a calls for service formula. Anoka County does have a public safety levy, and that state statute gives the county the authority to levy and incur debt for public safety improvements and equipment that both benefit Anoka County and its municipalities. This levy option has been utilized to fund 800 megahertz infrastructure improvements, but not 911 dispatch center operations or improvements. Next slide, please. Peer dispatch centers receive support through other county functions, such as budget, human resources, attorney, and facilities maintenance. All these items are mostly located elsewhere in county functions. For example, a budget office at the respective county provides an internal service and is usually not charged back to the dispatch center. With the DCC's budget, we're able to see the costs clearly that are providing internal services. For Pierre County budgets without the identification of chargebacks for the services, there's a limited opportunity to directly compare one county's budget from another. And most counties did apply some kind of chargeback for space allocation. Most counties, and to emphasize the point I was making earlier, the DCC offers complete transparency of costs to operate a dispatch center. Next slide, please. For 3-year averages, we see that personnel costs make up the majority of expenditures. Anoka County and the DCC have had the closest percentages. Anoka County did add 4 dispatcher positions in 2020, so this year. So we can expect that their expenditures in personnel costs would increase. On page 16 within the report, there's a breakdown of the top 5 expenditures for the DCC's other charges and services category. One main note of these items with other counties is that most of these top 5 expenditures would be found in other county department budgets based on the presenter's subjective view of Pierre County budgets. And we don't normally see these expenses within a dispatch center budget. If we do, it's provided with a limited chargeback. The DCC's top 5 expenditures in the other category make up are almost 80% of that category's makeup. And then this is one of the few stumbling blocks that make it difficult to directly compare the DCC's expenditures with peer counties because we cannot fully see some of the costs that are located in other county department budgets. One example is the DCC's contract with Logis. Most of these expenses would be found in an IT or finance department, such as payroll or software maintenance and licensing. The other 4 of the top 5 expenditures are the building lease, building maintenance, equipment maintenance, and the fiscal agent. If we look beyond the top 5 expenditures, there are a couple line items that may be found in other county departments among peer counties, such as the audit and legal services. When we add these into the top 5, the cost remains about 80% of that other category, which is about $2.15 million. And that accounts for about 24% of the DCC's 3-year average total expenditures. Next slide, please. Slide 8 offers a cost and call comparisons between dispatch centers as they were available. For this information, we need to consider what we learned in the last 3 slides. Dispatch centers adapt to serve their communities, and the DCC contains cost within its budgets that are not found in Pierre County dispatch center budgets. For this table, it is difficult to accurately represent the true costs of running a dispatch center in each jurisdiction due to the differences in organizational structure, finance structure, and operational functions. The DCC provides the most transparency to true costs since it is a separate entity and we are able to see each expenditure dedicated to dispatching operations, but also the support of those operations. When we view these data points on this slide, we have to remember the uniqueness that each jurisdiction brings with or operates with to serve their respective communities. Next slide, please. For shift structures, there's no industry standard. We can see the difference among peer counties on this slide. And next slide, please. As we continue with operational, yes, okay. As we continue with operational structure, other key differences Differences include working supervisors and stage dispatching. Scott and Washington County have leads or supervisors that answer calls for the majority of their shift, which limits their supervisory capacity. The DCC and Ramsey County have supervisors that focus on supervisory functions and administrative functions. For stage dispatching, Anoka, Scott, and Washington counties utilize single stage dispatching. In single stage dispatching, the dispatcher receives the call and dispatches emergency services. The DCC and Ramsey County operate with two-stage dispatching. One key difference between Ramsey and the DCC, Ramsey has telecommunicators that answer the call and transfer the information via computer to dispatchers. The only time that a dispatcher will speak to a caller is the fire dispatcher when they provide pre-arrival medical instructions to callers. For the DCC, dispatchers are used more universally. One dispatcher acts as the call taker while another dispatches the emergency services. The call taker will, if necessary, provide pre-arrival medical instructions to callers. Next slide, please. And now I'll turn the PowerPoint over to Dave Paulson.
Thank you, Alex. My name is Dave Paulson. I'm with OPA, and I'll be leading you through the second half of the presentation today. In terms of call volume, we received information from 3 communities, the DCC, Anoka, and Ramsey counties. Their call volumes, their CAT event totals correspond directly to their populations. So as their populations increase, so does their event totals. One item we did note was that between 2017 and 2018, you'll see a large increase in Ramsey County's totals. The reason for that jump in CAT events is due to the fact that that year they incorporated White Bear Lakes dispatching into their center. So they experienced a large jump at that point. Also, you'll note that DCC and Ramsey incorporate EMS dispatching, whereas Anoka County does not include that service. So as a result, those call volumes for DCC and Ramsey are partially inflated due to that. We did take a look at quality of service by looking at the amount of time it takes to answer 911 calls. With that, we saw comparable performance between all 3 organizations that responded to our request. The one item to note was the only 100% answering time that we observed was in 2018, where DCC was able to answer 100% of their calls in under 20 seconds. Next slide, please. In terms of customization, we saw that all of the peer counties had a degree of customization. All of them were actually tailored to the individual needs of the county they served. What we did, however, note was a continuation of a spectrum of customization. On the lower end of the spectrum, providing less customization were counties such as Anoka and Scott, whereas on the higher end, we did see the DCC. Examples of DCC's customization for calls include animal calls, vehicle lockouts, after-hour utility callouts, after-hour lobby calls for law enforcement agencies, mail and bank runs, order tows for accidents, calls for investigators, and detox calls. This compares to an example on the lower end of the spectrum, Anoka County, whereas they only take customized calls for animal callouts and vehicle lockouts. One item we also observed was only Washington County incorporated an automation feature for this customization. So in Washington County, their CAD system handles a degree of customization, not 100%, but a degree to which can help staff. Unfortunately, there was insufficient data to review the specific impacts of customization on staffing levels. One other item that was customized, we looked at warrant confirmations. DCC, Scott, and Washington counties all addressed warrant confirmations, but all addressed them in their own unique degree and own unique approaches. So another point of customization for you. Next slide, please. For customer satisfaction during our peer interviews, we approached each peer county and asked them for some representatives from member municipalities, so either municipal managers or public safety directors, that might be able to provide us with confidential responses with regard to the customer satisfaction they experience from their call centers to their individual municipalities. The only two counties that responded were the DCC and Ramsey County, and both had very high response rates to our request. Of the DCC representative municipalities that we contacted, we heard back from 4 out of 5, all of which were municipal administrators. For Ramsey County, we heard back from 3 out of 4, all of which were either municipal administrators or public safety directors. Both Dakota and Ramsey County had very favorable responses that we heard in terms of their services provided to member municipalities. There were 2 items that were noted by DCC communities in terms of an interest in. One was in terms of the funding structure. The other was in terms of the number of committee meetings and the committee structure. For Ramsey County, the 2 negative points of feedback that we received were with regard to the turnover in the dispatch center and also with regard to fire response times. In addition to those interviews that we conducted, we also asked each dispatch center if they had any customer service surveys conducted, specifically surveys performed based on callers that received 911 services. The only example we were able to find was DCC had conducted a survey 4 to 5 years ago of people who utilized 911 services. Unfortunately, the respondents often confused the services they received. So example, police, fire, EMS responding to the call. They often confused that with the actual services they received from the 911 center staff. So those results weren't reliable. Next slide, please. In terms of this presentation, it's been provided to the DCC Executive Committee in late April. And then in May, we provided it to the Board of Directors of the DCC. At that meeting, there was a motion which was approved to create a work group to further consider issues that have been discussed. That included in their recommendation, 2 Dakota County Commissioners, representatives from the Board of Directors and Executive Committee of the DCC, representatives from fire, law enforcement, and the county sheriff, and also the executive director sitting as an ex officio member. Next slide, please. And that concludes our presentation. And with that, we would be happy to stand for any questions.
All right, questions? Mike?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have as many questions, just a couple comments for starters, and appreciate that the work that OPA did on this, because it, you know, one of the things that I think that we as a board had back in August was the concerns of, you know, there have always been really 2 issues. One of them is how to operate more efficient, and the second one was how to pay for it. And as those who've been involved in this process here, the cities continually would go and say it's a grossly inefficient organization, and we don't want to pay for it. So they've kind of, and they couldn't figure out what part they were talking about here. And I think we as a board were trying to say, well, how inefficient is it, and what, you know, and if you would go and become more efficient, what are the costs of that? And what I kind of, my takeaways that came on here was that it's a very well-run organization, and the numbers have proven that it's successful in how it operates. Governance-wise, it's very clumsy, but there's also some things that I think we as a board have gone and said, can't you fix some of the things to become more efficient? And they were so focused on saying, no, we want you to pay for it. And back and forth on that, you know, there's conversations that go with the fact that it's transparent. You know, none of the other ones pay for their own legal costs or their IT costs. They're just, those are kind of covered in other departments. But there's 2 points in there that still, I think, need to be addressed, and that is some of the structure as with the supervisor, and then also the customization are things that the DCC board has said, regardless of a conversation on funding, that conversation needs to be had at the DCC board level of ways, if you're going to go, whoever's going to pay for it, why wouldn't we not want the most efficient organization we can have? And we've OPA pretty much pointed out a number of things that possibly could be done to become more efficient on that part in there. The second point that I would bring up is that I didn't share this at our board meeting because it was getting long, but at the meeting on the 21st or 2nd, I think, of May, the DCC board did meet and got to see this presentation. And at that, they kind of came with the, I was pretty pointed about this point, but every conversation that has been had before has really kind of been what the cities or what the DCC board wants the county to do. They never had the county involved in the process. And I went and said, if I'm not guaranteeing anything changes, but the fact of the matter is, if you're putting a gun to somebody's head, you're not gonna. That's not a great way to negotiate. And so part of the conversation said, well, maybe we need to go and actually have some of the county at the table if we're going to see if there's any way to change. Maybe the answer might be nothing, but so that's why the last slide was, well, let's get a number of people together to try to see if there's any way to have a conversation. Initially, it was on the big broad governance and everything else in there. And I had tried to encourage saying, you guys keep talking about governance and then you don't do anything because all you talk about is the financing. So why don't we see if there's a way to have a conversation on financing before we would go back to that. So my point on that was that it's a bigger number than I thought it was going to be. I tried to make the point that if your whole conversation is have the county do it, I didn't think you should have the county still be a minority on a committee that you're telling the county what to do. But I was assured that one of the guiding principles would be that it has to have support of the county members who would serve on a proposal before it would be accepted. So that was one of the guiding principles. And then my last point, Madam Chair, was that I know that one of the administrators of that will be Matt Smith. I know the sheriff will be on there. And my recommendation to do this would be to put myself and Commissioner Holberg, who not only serve as the director and the alternate for DCC, but also our chair and vice chair on this, and probably have slightly different opinions. So it's nice to have that aspect in there, unless there is some other board members who feel that this would be something they'd like to go and get involved with. So, but that would be my recommendation, is that the two of us would try to see what could happen on that point there. And if that's the case, there'd be a couple of meetings, and we wouldn't want to go and make a decision without bringing back to the board, to DGP, to have some kind of midpoint conversations as well. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Mike, would some of what you're trying to accomplish be to look at how to make it more efficient? I mean, the cost structure does look like it's significantly higher per call than the peers. Is that part of the conversation, so that you focus on that rather than on who's paying or governance?
Well, I think that was some of the idea. Was some of these things in here, it wasn't necessarily governance, but it was how do you get that cost down per call, and that. So I think there was some of that when basically at the point now we're just trying to formulate the right people, but that's probably where our biggest divide was, Madam Chair, was that some people wanted to do everything, and the point was, well, whoever pays for it, how are you the best run organization? And as I understand it, this committee was going to have a conversation. Matt was on the call. He might be able to support this, but that was part of the conversation that was going to happen. But at the same time, the DCC board itself was going to be having some of these conversations on ways like supervisor and some of those customizations. So I think it was going to be a topic within the small group, but the actual current governance was also going to be working on some of those issues at the same time.
Okay. Matt, did you want to comment?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I think that, as I heard the conversation, as I think about it, certainly if the county is going to be asked to assume a bigger share of the cost burden, the county has more stake in making sure that the organization is efficiently run than anybody, because everybody else's shares, if the cities are successful persuading the board to take on a bigger share, their shares will go down anyway. So I do think it's an element, but I also agree with Commissioner Slavic that we've been these conversations have sort of tried to boil the whole ocean, and we haven't really gotten anywhere. We've talked kind of about everything and therefore nothing. And I think, being a little bit more specific about particular elements, like the financing and like what do we do to control the cost growth at the DCC, to me seemed like a good place to start. And I also agree with Commissioner Slavic. The group size is a little more unwieldy than you would have hoped for, but one of the features of the DCC is it's got lots of stakeholders.
Okay. Other comments, anyone?
And Madam Chair, I would just add, thank you, Madam Chair. I would just add that I did ask Commissioner Holberg before I threw her name out there, and she did say that she was willing. So.
Oh, okay. That wasn't a surprise for her. Oh, good.
That was. I don't know if she's happy about it, but she's willing.
Whatever the chair wants,
Oh boy.
I believe that's the reason why she's the community services chair. She couldn't say no to me 3 years ago.
All right.
It's a love fest.
Team player.
All right. So we're going to put together this group to try to look at some of these issues. Is that kind of where we're at this point?
That's where we're at. They're looking to start next week.
Okay. All right. Appreciate that update. Looks like Commissioner Egan wants to weigh in. Come on.
Well, just very quickly, Madam Chair, one of our main objectives, of course, is to create greater efficiency, but I haven't heard any suggested proposals for that greater efficiency. Are there any suggestions?
Matt, do you want to jump on, or you want me to start?
Well, sure. Well, I mean, I can say a couple of things. I mean, I think as we've seen in the research, and we've seen just in discussions over the last couple of years, one element is customization, the degree of customization and how you handle that. And customization is in part, I think, a product of many stakeholders all having a hand in managing. And the other piece are some, frankly, to me, more technical pieces about one stage versus two stage dispatching, what you ask the managers and supervisors to do. So to me, those are a couple of operational issues, which seems to me to be kind of management policy questions within the DCC.
Some starting points.
And my understanding, Madam Chair, is that the customization isn't overly that much cost savings. It just takes more time and some of that. There is a little bit, but the stage and having supervisors that don't take calls is more of the greatest cost savings. Whereas the other ones have individuals who take the calls as well. They just kind of oversee the rest of the team, but they take phone calls. We have people, supervisors, that just go in and supervise. So.
Commissioner Workman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When this was last brought back to the GGP, there was the report, I think it was mentioned briefly in the presentation, that had recommendations for some changes for efficiencies. Are they going to dust off that report and take a look at that?
Matt can clarify if I don't have this, but in talking with the executive director, some of them, as a result of you pointing some of that, they've started to do some of those things. The kind of low-hanging administrative things we're able to do, but I think some of there were some things that needed a full board perspective on. But I know some of those simple things that you can do, they have done some of them just based on kind of a push from, I would say, our board that have done some of that administratively. But other things are more policy level and need further discussion and have not been done.
Okay, and then just a follow up to that, if I could, when the DCC was first formed, the size of the committee was set at that size because it was a new organization. And the goal was always to trim down the size of a couple of committees. So will that also be part of the discussion, is the size of the DCC board itself and the technical advisory group, as well as the governance structure?
So that was the individuals who wanted to do everything wanted that included. And I think the conversation was let's get the elephant out of the room first. And maybe maybe it's a different set of players, or maybe it's the same people to kind of have a phase two. But if we kind of talk about everything, we're not going to get anything done. Matt, is that pretty fair? But that is certainly one of the issues in there. And there's been, just to give you some of the topics, it's everything from figuring out kind of that fixed cost that other counties are already paying for DCCs, and then have the per, that would reduce the per call. There's conversations on the unincorporated areas, having them have some skin in the game, pay for this thing. There's conversations and saying, let the county or sheriff run it, but we'll still pay our part in there. So that's kind of and then the idea is, and that and any more that kind of go into the conversation. But I think you are hitting it. And to be quite honest with you, one of the parts of the conversation is no other DCC has an executive director that's paid at the equivalent that our executive director is paid, because when we saw some of the structure in the longer set of slides, some deputy county managers are the direct reporters, some sheriffs are the direct report of kind of overseeing the operations. We have at the DCC Joint Powers Board have a executive director who's comparable to one of our division directors at the county for salary.
And then, Madam Chair, if I may, just one last question. Thank you. When we also received the presentation, we looked at they rated the service, and we were like at an 8 and everybody else was like at 3. And I think it was touched on a little bit, or you may have mentioned it a little bit. Is that also something that will be looked at, is the amount of service that the DCC provides as compared to other similar PSAPs?
Yeah, that's what we're calling the customization.
Got it.
Yeah, so that's the customization.
Okay, thank you.
We are far more customized than any other 911 center PSAP in our
Yes, we
peer.
are. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good conversation. Good luck. Don't hurry it along too far or too quickly. With that, I guess we'll move to the county manager's report. Matt?
All right. Well, Madam Chair, Commissioners, not too much more, but just looking ahead, we will then, as a result of this morning's discussion, next Tuesday on the 9th, we'll hold the GGP meeting. On the 16th, we've got the board, and then we also have a budget workshop. So the first of our 2021 kind of formal budget workshops is scheduled for the 16th. We think this is one that we can handle pretty well on a Zoom kind of format. Staff will send out some materials ahead of time. We've gotten in the habit of putting together some kind of briefing materials ahead of time, can walk through it. And I'll just tell you in advance, this budget preparation cycle has more question marks around it than any of the 12 or so I've worked on now at the county, because there's so many things that are just unknown. But we'll want to talk with you and give you the lay of the land and directionally at least get a sense from you of the whole range of things that we're going to need to be thinking about between now and end of summer. So that's what I have. Happy to answer any questions.
All right. Yes, I'm sure it will be challenging. We're sort of gotten slammed from both sides, and maybe a third one coming down. Who knows? It's just kind of a lot of uncertainty for you to deal with. Appreciate that. Comments from any of the commissioners? If not, I think we're at the end of this meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn, Slavic.
Slavic moves it.
Second, Egan.
Egan seconds. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Sounds good. We're done. Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
Commissioners, so then will we move